And welcome to the first ever show of Goldsmith Weighs In, The Harsh Truth. I'm Craig Scott Goldsmith, along with my co-host, Aaron, The Voice Phillips. Say hello to everybody, Aaron.
Hello, everybody. Thank you. This is going to be a lot of fun. Thank you for having me.
This show's topic is going to be on climate change and the Billion Man March. For those that do not know what the Billion Man March is, it's going to be the world's biggest block party on October 2nd of this year, where people will go out onto their street in front of their house. They'll take their phone with their phone lights and their flashlights and their candles, and they'll point it to the sky. And collectively, we are going to send a massive, important message to the UN that's meeting in November 1st in Glasgow, Scotland, to discuss climate change, one of many meetings they've had. This time, we want to send a message that we've talked way too long. It's time for some decisive action. On the show today, we're going to have a very special guest. We have got one of the world's top climatologists. This gentleman has written books. He's written 270 journals. You cannot find somebody that knows more about climate change than Dr. Kevin Trenberth. So he'll be joining us shortly. We're going to be asking him some hard questions. That's why it's called The Harsh Truth. We're approaching 419 parts per million. We are not approaching it, we're there. And that hasn't happened in 3.5 to 4 million years. The last time that happened, there were saber-toothed tigers roaming around and woolly mammoths and that kind of thing, and the seas were 78 feet higher than today. So we're on a trajectory that's heading us back into the Pliocene period, and it would change the world and our way of life forever. So we're hoping that we can change that trajectory, and that's why we're having this show on this topic today. Aaron, I'm done with the intro. Is there anything you got to ask?
Well, you know what? I just wanted to clarify. The 419 parts per million, that was pertaining to CO2 levels we were talking about, right?
Exactly.
Holy cow.
Yeah, that's 419, and it's rising at 3 parts per million per year, or 3.5. So that's why everybody's saying, gee, we may have 10 years to try to get a handle on this. But I think you're going to find a revelation in this show that may not be accurate. We may be getting, bad trouble comes faster than you like.
Of course.
And we may be seeing things we don't want to see sooner than we'd like.
Yeah, and to the lay people watching this, what does that parts per million, how does that affect things people will see every day? And I'm curious to learn more about how people can see what is being affected by this O2 stuff.
Well, if you'll think back, to the 90s or 2000, 2010, you weren't seeing 200 climate change records being broken in a couple of months. You weren't seeing 7 degrees above average temperatures all year long.
Right.
You were not seeing these extreme volatile temperatures. You know that building that just collapsed?
Yes.
They're thinking that may be linked to climate change because it's right next to the ocean and the water is rising there.
So it affect the foundation and everything.
You got it.
Wow.
So it's starting to affect everybody in one way or another.
Okay.
So there is no more important issue that we as a civilization or a species face.
Yeah. That's crazy to think about that billions of years of CO2 has been out there. But now within the last 20, 30, 40 years, whatever it is, for it to take this kind of effect on our environment is crazy.
When you look back, you remember when there were clear skies in Vegas?
Yeah.
I came here in the 70s. It was perfectly clear, and we had cold winters.
Yeah.
No more. Those are gone.
Yeah.
Now it's we don't have really a fall,
Right.
A winter. We just kind of move right into spring about
Yeah.
3 months early.
I was going to say, winter's about, what, 2 weeks long in this town?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Although coming from the East Coast, a 2-week-long winter is nice to have, though. I will say that.
Yeah, well, listen, there's a point beyond which it gets uncomfortable.
No, of course. Absolutely. No, I'm anxious to learn more about what's going on. And, of course, then leading up to the Billion Man March event coming up October 2nd.
Oh, boy.
So even though October sounds so far away, it really isn't, because we're turning the calendar to July here in a couple of days.
It's 100 days. 100 days.
Wow.
And, if you stop to think, they've had dozens and dozens of these meetings, and they haven't really done anything to effectively, significantly lower CO2.
Right.
This is our last off-ramp, Aaron, our last off-ramp. We got to do something. They have to act, or we're in deep trouble.
Now, locally, to those of us living in the area who've come to Vegas, our producer just put a picture up of Lake Mead, the dry bed with a boat that had, I don't know if you can pop that up real quickly, but here's what Lake Mead looks like. What it used, well, you could see in the background there, the white band at the base of those rocks or this foundation around there. That, of course, as we know, what used to be the height of the water levels. But because, and this is what it looks like now with the sandbars, but all that white at the bottom of that mountain on the right corner there, that was previous water levels. But because of heat, evaporation, climate change, now we're looking at potential water issues here in Southern California. And we're fed by the Colorado River, which is having their own issues.
Exactly.
So,
and the snowfall in the Rockies is way down.
Yeah.
We're at our lowest point on that lake in something like 70 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, all you have to do is look around you, and you can see some red flags of climate change.
Right.
And if it's this bad now, where are we going to be in 10 years or 20 years? Now, I'd like to bring Kevin on.
Okay.
Dr. Trenberth, and is this good time?
well, you tell me, do we want to welcome him with our sponsor first, or did you want to just bring him right in?
No, break for a commercial, then we'll bring him in.
There you go. All right, so on the other side of the break, we'll have our guests come in with us here. But first, this show is sponsored by Supernatural Blowfish 8. Do you enjoy fine products from all natural hemp? Well, if you do, then you are going to want the best American-made Delta 8. Blowfish 8 is not only supernatural, but there are no chemicals, no additives ever. We control the entire process from seed to grow to distillation and precise molecular selection to the finished product so that you can get the benefit of the purest, highest potency Delta 8 product available. So, if you're looking for the finest of hemp products that can deliver the most relaxing, pain-free experience, then Blowfish 8 is for you. Just go to Blowfish 8, and that's the number, blowfish8.com, to find all of the products. You must be 21 or older to shop. Blowfish 8 is not available in some states that restrict Delta 8 sales. A portion of Blowfish sales, though, goes to plant coral gardens to help replenish the coral reefs around the world, and we want to thank Blowfish 8 for sponsoring today's show.
That helps pay the bills.
There you go.
All right. Now, Aaron, I'd like to bring on Dr. Trentworth, and let's see if we can get him on the line.
Hey, he's right there. Hello, Dr. Kevin. How are you, sir?
I am fine, thanks. Good to hear from you.
Now, you're Dr. Trentworth. You're in New Zealand right now.
I am, but I spent 42 years in the U.S. I'm a scientist at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, and I was there for 35 years. And I have just retired, but I'm still active. I'm writing books and various other things.
Gotcha. Now, I have done a little bit of research on your background. I understand you're a fellow of the American Meteorological Society, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of New Zealand. You've written over 270 articles on climate change, and you have too many awards and way too many citations for us to mention here. But Dr. Trentworth, your influence and impact on the scientific thought and understanding of the Earth's climate, according to what I have read, is frankly, sir, unparalleled. And we are just so very honored to have you on the show today. Now, are you ready for some tough questions on climate change?
Sure, I'm happy to try to answer what I can.
Okay, that's wonderful. Now, we're currently at 419 parts per million in CO2 levels. Is that correct?
That's about right, yes. Of course, it goes up and down with
Right.
an annual cycle, and so there's there's a little bit of a drawdown during the northern spring and summer when the plants take up carbon dioxide, and then there's a maximum in the fall and the winter when the decay of the leaves and branches on the forest floor put more carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere.
Now we're growing at, Doctor, about 3 parts per million or 3.5 parts per million per year. So it would appear to most people that we still have about 10 years to get a handle on the problem. But when you add in the other greenhouse gases, the even more potent ones like methane and nitrous oxide, that combined add another 25 parts per million to the equation, then we're already at 443 parts per million, and maybe as much as 450 already. So the big question is, are we already there, or do we have another 3 to 5 years left to act? We all know that the 450 parts per million is the point of no return line that most scientists say we are beginning to go outside of our boundaries to be able to handle some of the climate change problems, and we risk triggering even more dangerous tipping points than we've already triggered. So where do you believe we are really in the climate change pipeline? Are we already there, or do we really have a little bit of time left to try to do something?
Well, climate change is already with us, and it's already having major impacts. The global mean temperature has gone up by 2 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds like a relatively small number, but superposed upon that is all of the weather that goes on and things like the El Nino phenomenon, which is very familiar to any listeners that are in California and so on. And the people up in the Pacific Northwest are, experiencing temperatures in the hundreds or over 110 in Oregon and Washington, as we speak. And so this is a symptom. Global climate change is contributing to that. And it varies where you are around the world. All of the wildfires and the drought in the western parts of the United States are exacerbated by climate change. The hurricanes, a record number of hurricanes last year in the tropical Atlantic. That is another symptom of climate change. And so the climate change is manifested in different ways in different parts of the world.
Let me ask you this, Dr. Trenberth. Do you think that we've already hit that line beyond which we are really getting to dangerous climate change? In other words, are we right at that line of 450, or just do you think we still got a few years left, a very slight window to do something? What's your personal opinion?
Well, as I say, climate change is already happening, and what happens is that it's apt to be exacerbated as the numbers go up further and further, and that's the consistent warning of scientists, in fact, for about 20 years now. And so at some point, there are some really irreversible changes that occur that cause major damage, and I guess that's partly what people talk about. I'm not sure what that picture is on the right there, but Superstorm Sandy and examples of that kind of thing and the devastation that occurs with it is occurring with increasing frequency in different parts of the world, and so the question is how much you want to tolerate or can tolerate, and it means also trying to assess as best you can what you think may happen, and if possible build resilience, if possible try to plan for it and offset that. So that means, if you're up in Seattle at the moment, you might want to rush out and buy an air conditioner, for instance.
Now, Dr. Trenberth, the picture on the left, of course, is an increasingly warming world. The picture on the right is if we don't change our trajectory, we could kick out the underpinnings of civilization by having it be overwhelmed with some of the tipping points that we trigger along the way between now and 2050. So it is an existential problem that could affect the way we all live, and it could affect a civilization, according to that article that we had up there, by 2050. So
Yes. So the way in which it becomes a really existential problem is through the supply of water, drinking water, and also food. And at some point, and the estimate is that it could easily occur somewhere around about 2050. We may cross that point where farmers can no longer grow crops where they currently grow them. They may be able to grow something else, but it requires a major change in their whole way of doing things. Same thing with all of the forests in the Northwest, for instance. They may no longer be viable, and if a wildfire goes through, then they won't grow back anymore. And so the whole existence that we have right now begins to change quite radically, and the shortages of drinking water, the kind of droughts that we see in the western parts of the United States and in other parts of the world, Australia, all of the wildfires and the air quality issues that go along with that, those become so large and so pervasive that it's a major threat to the population, and there becomes a lot of what we call environmental refugees. People can no longer live where they currently are. They're struggling to find somewhere else, and you can see the sort of things that have already happened in the last couple of years that were sort of triggered by the war in Syria and in other places, the strife in parts of Africa, and all the refugees that are occurring. And would they be allowed to settle in Europe? Will they be able to go elsewhere?
Yep.
And so that kind of a problem becomes so large that it becomes overwhelming.
Exactly, and I think that graph shows that we're right at that black line, or maybe a little bit before it, on the right, and on the left, those are the 9 tipping points. We've already triggered, I think, 5 or 6. Like the Antarctic is irreversible now, and so I guess is Greenland. But once we go past that black line, which is supposedly 450 parts per million, we really go into uncharted territory for our entire species. And by 2050, we're in trouble. By 2070, we could be on that extinction list. So I had read that corn, wheat, and rice will not germinate over 6 degrees on average Fahrenheit warmer. So you're talking about a food source that supplies half the world, if not more. So starving people at some point would not be a pretty picture.
Can I just? I'm sorry.
That's certainly correct. But I want to make a point that if this important meeting, the Conference of the Parties later this year, can really get a handle on this and take actions, that the whole problem I don't think they can make the problem go away, but they can certainly slow it down. And so instead of 2050 being a critical point, they can push it to 2080 or 2100, for instance. And that has enormously beneficial effects because it allows us to do things along the way, to develop new technology, to plan for it, and to adapt to what is already happening. And so one has to also have a little bit of optimism that maybe we can take actions that are meaningful. And certainly the Biden administration is trying to do that and correct some of the problems that arose in the Trump administration.
That was my next question, actually, and there is optimism and hope. That's why we are having the Billion Man March, to try to send a signal that we'd like to see some action that would actually change our trajectory. But President Biden, doctor, has said that he's committing $2 trillion over 10 years to fight climate change, and has pledged to cut CO2 by 50% in 10 years and to reach net zero by 2050. But from what your and my discussion is, isn't that really way too little, too late, if we risk triggering some of those other major 9 tipping points that are going to cause us such overwhelming problems?
Well, as I say, I think we are going to have to experience some climate change, which means there also needs to be a component that plans for the consequences that are already coming for en route. And I think that could be manageable, but I'm not sure that that's a major part of what they're planning at the moment. So we are going to continue to experience some climate change with the consequences of that.
Okay.
But we certainly need to get on with it, and the U.S. is a major player, a major leader on this, along with China. And if those two countries can really get their act together, then I think the rest of the G7 and the G20 countries would begin to come on board. The peer pressure becomes enormous, and I think you might be surprised at how rapidly things can change. But the technology is built in, and it takes 10 to 20 years in order to have a really major change in our whole energy system.
I just want to mention, first of all, on our screen, you can see our phone numbers. If you have a question to call in, you can ask Scott, you can ask the good doctor, 702-329-6947, or if you are calling outside the United States, 1-855-502-4321. If you are watching this on Facebook on the Billion Man March page, we are monitoring the chat room for any questions, and you're welcome to do all of that so we can communicate and ask your question if you have any concerns about climate change and all that and what that's going to mean. Now, from my side, I just have a quick
Go ahead, please.
non-technical question
okay.
for us non-techies. Okay, the things that we're talking about, the G7 summit and all of these things and some of the controls that the governments have to look at, those are obviously big, sweeping programs and projects that have to go in place from a much grander scale, right? So, Doctor, let me ask you this question. The layman, the everyday user of water in their front lawn, cars idling in the colder winters, what can a household do day in and day out to conserve and protect our climate on an everyday basis, even if it may sound like a small part, because parts per million and 450, but to a lot of people, these numbers are so outside their scope of understanding that they're going to go, well, let's leave it to the government. What can people do on a day in and day out basis, perhaps, to help protect the climate?
Yes, so I think the government has a key role by sort of setting the stage, and maybe through tax policy and some prices, things like a gas tax and stuff like that, they can help to set the stage. But yes, a lot of this action takes place at the state level, at the city level, and at the individual level. And so the problem relates primarily to the burning of fossil fuels, and that means trying not to burn coal, especially, and even natural gas, and transitioning to more renewable energy. And so that means electricity becomes very important, because we can generate electricity using solar and wind and hydropower, and maybe even a bit of nuclear thrown in there. And if it's all integrated in the appropriate way, so that we can move energy from South Dakota wind farm or Texas wind farm to places where the electricity is being used, and we can charge a new electric car, which might be in people's driveway in 10 years or 15 years, or something like that, and maybe smaller cars. Why do we need a big SUV to commute to back and forwards to work? Why not a little one-seater vehicle that certainly protects you from rain, but which is much, much more efficient? And we have to really start thinking outside of the box and on new ways of doing things. We saw some remarkable things during the pandemic, where people stopped commuting. They're working from home. Why isn't that built into our system more? And if that kind of a transition can take place in the way in which we do things, and that relates also to how friendly the technology is to enable that, then those are the sorts of developments that can make an enormous difference.
Dr. Trenberth, just to kind of follow up on Aaron's question, it kind of boils down to park your car, maybe find that bike or walk or take mass transportation,
right.
Eat less meat, change your diet, plant a tree or 2 or 5 or 10, that kind of thing. There are things massive things that individuals can do, and together no matter what the government does, it has to eventually loop back to us, and we have to do it.
And that was my point.
So
yeah.
we might as well just start doing it now and save the government a lot of time. Because from what I heard you just say, the 10-year plan for Biden may be a little bit farther out than we need it to be. We really need to get something significantly done in 5 years, but we have an awful big boat to turn. This is a very, very big boat.
We have a question that just came in the chat room, and this is from Terry, who's listening. And thank you, Terry. How does not eating meat help the environment?
Well, it's real simple. It takes a whole lot of grazing land that they have to cut down forests to provide to the cows so they can make that hamburger.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just a tremendous amount of water, a tremendous amount of agricultural space, a tremendous amount of deforestation to enjoy that Burger King or whatever burger.
Thank you, Terry, for the question.
Now, Dr. Trenberth, I got one more question for you. Or actually more than one. But have you seen any plan or heard of a plan that would be a practical, effective plan to deal with climate change within the time frame we need? And let's just say that time frame is really 5 years instead of 10.
See, this is a problem. Let me just interject one other thing that we didn't touch on, and that is heating and cooling of houses. This relates to air conditioning, and especially all through the Midwest and so on. It gets cold in winter. And so how do you deal with that? And there are tremendous gains that can be made through improved efficiency and insulation of various kinds. And so actually that in the short term, that's where some of the biggest gains can actually be made. Also
in buildings and industry as well.
Yes. And so part of it relates to people's attitudes too. I mean, one of the things that used to annoy me is you go to somewhere like Miami in the middle of summer and you need to put a jacket on because the air conditioning is on and it's so cold inside. And then you go down there in winter and it's so hot. I mean, the seasons are actually reversed inside. Good heavens, why not wear a sweater in the middle of winter and take it off in summertime? So there are some sensible things like that are very easy to do and improve the insulation in your attic and so on.
Doctor, have you seen any plan or heard of any plan that's going to get us out of this trouble?
Not really entirely. And let me use a couple of examples. In France, they just decided to put in a gas tax. And they just put it in place. And then there were all of these so-called yellow jacket protests, and it shut down the whole country. And so they were trying to cut down on the use of gasoline, but they implemented it in an extremely poorly manner. And so this is the role of politicians in particular. It's how you go about this stuff as what you do and what is viable. And if you try and do things too fast, then the public reacts very negatively, and you may not get anywhere. So a 5-year time frame makes it very difficult. I think you have to plan this and get people's expectations, but you also have to do it in the right way. And so if there is a price on carbon put in place, it has to be done gradually, and the public has to see that there are benefits from that in other areas. And so that if there were, I mean, the simplest example would be gasoline and a gas tax. And so if we put the gas tax up by $1 tomorrow, the reaction would be enormous, and people would protest, and there would be all kinds of reactions, and it wouldn't work. But if we put the gas tax up by a penny tomorrow, people wouldn't even notice. And so if you did it a penny a month, or a penny every let's say a penny every 2 weeks. So after a year, the gas tax is up by 25 cents. People still wouldn't really even notice. After 2 years, after 4 years, it's up $1. And it goes inexorably upwards. I'm going to get a smaller car. And so it changes the decision process of individuals. And I use this as an example because it's the sort of thing we have to do across the board in all of the other areas, and provide incentives and carrots, as well as some sticks.
I agree with you, Doctor. That's actually an excellent idea you just put forth. But it gets down to, our time frame of solving this problem may not be Mother Earth's time frame of creating this problem. I don't have to tell you that we've got the potential for, I think there's 7,000 methane implosions now that they're finding in Siberia and Alaska. Maybe you could put up a picture of one of those
Yep,
for
it's
us.
coming up right now.
Yeah,
There you go.
and it could get hotter and come quicker than any of us want or even could imagine it could. So, methane has the ability. It's been the culprit in 4 out of 5 of the extinctions, all but the one with the dinosaurs. So, it's there, and we're already disassociating part of it. So it could come a lot quicker than we'd like. So I guess the question is there's no real plan that you know of, or that I've heard of, or have heard of, that really addresses the plan within the time frame we'd like to see it. So that means we're subject to adaptation to the whatever is coming our way. Let me see if I guess the bottom line on this, Dr. Trenberth, is: are we just too late? Do we need to just work out an adaptation plan and do the best we can? Maybe by 2100 we'll be living underground or something. I don't know. What's your opinion on where we're headed?
Well, we certainly need to do everything we can and put things in place so that 20 years from now we are doing things rather differently than we are now. But at the same time, there will be climate change and climate change effects. We need to recognize that those are coming. We need to plan for them. We need this. So this is the so-called adaptation. We need to do assessments of where we are most vulnerable, where the rising sea level is going to cause a whole lot more sunny day flooding and on the East Coast and so on. And the erosion in coastal areas along the coast of California. All of those kind of problems are things that we need to expect and plan for and try to build resilience to them. And if we do those two things hand in hand, try and stop the problem as best we can, but I don't think we're going to completely succeed, and then plan for the consequences, that's what the future really looks like to me.
I just have one last question for
Sure,
me,
please.
because we could do hours on this, but did the pandemic, with everybody being shut down, and like you alluded to earlier, we couldn't drive to work, we couldn't go out, roughly, let's say that was for a 12-month period for all intents and purposes, did that buy us any additional time to add to our bank of, okay, we have a little more time now because we were closed and couldn't do anything for a year? Did that buy us any time towards a resolution time frame?
Well, there were a number of reports that received quite a lot of media attention that the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels had decreased and was quite a lot less during this past year than previously. But the trouble was, if you looked at the total carbon dioxide, it kept going relentlessly upwards, as we talked about earlier. And the reason is because of all of the wildfires in California, especially all of these so-called bushfires and wildfires in Australia. And so there are all of these other things which are actually related to climate change that were putting more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so the carbon dioxide increases kept occurring regardless of the pandemic. But the pandemic was certainly an indicator that, if things really change, we can make some differences. But then, we need to plan for all of these other consequences, and the wildfires are one of them.
Now, Dr. Trenberth, do you think that the UN Conference on Climate Change, I think this is maybe the 21st conference on climate change since Kyoto in 1997 was adopted, and they, of course, blew by every CO2 reduction goal or emission goal that they set, including the one they did in France. Do you think that this particular meeting, that they are going to do what's necessary to try to put climate change in check? Do you think there's that feeling of we have to get something done? What are your colleagues and what are your sources telling you?
On climate change.
Right.
And they have issued major reports about every 6 or 7 years. The latest one has been delayed, but it's coming out in the next few months. And it's going to really emphasize a lot of things that we've actually been saying now for about 20 years, but it's going to make those points a lot stronger as ammunition for the politicians that are going into this conference of parties later this year. And so the question will come back to the politics and setting good examples by some countries. There are quite a number of countries, including the U.S. and New Zealand, who have declared that they're going to try to become carbon neutral by 2050, and the question is, can we get all of these other countries on board? Can we speed up the changes in China, changes in India? What about Africa? If Africa starts to develop, suddenly all of the gains that are made in other countries could be completely offset. And so, part of the problem comes back also to delicate issues like population. Are there too many people in the world? Are we eating too much beef? And could some of it be better spent on other food products? And this relates to diet and so on. And so that all of these kind of questions that are out there, I think there's a very good team associated with the White House and with the current administration that are aware of the political difficulties in addressing this and are trying to step along very carefully, but are receiving no help whatsoever from the Republicans in Congress at the current time. And yet everybody gets affected by climate change, and I really do not understand that attitude at all.
Well, Dr. Trent Berth, there absolutely is nowhere to run for anybody. We all going to feel the effects of climate change, but
it's a global problem.
I'm sorry?
It's a global problem.
It's a global problem. There's nowhere you can run. So I feel the politicians make great rhetoric, but when it comes down to it, they politely sidestep any real solid, measurable action because we support the oil and coal industry to the point, I think, of $5.6 trillion around the world in subsidies and for other things. So I don't know, when you're dependent on getting elected and you need that money from Chevron, it's not clear whether you're actually going to do anything about it or not.
That's a major part of the problem, indeed. You've hit the nail on the head right there.
Exactly.
I just want to check with the good
Sure.
doctor, because he mentioned before I went on the air that he's got something going on after we're done.
Yeah.
So, doctor, I just want to check on your time. Are you doing okay?
Yes, what is it? It's 9:41 here. I've got 5 minutes.
All right, I just want to make sure.
We'll be done in a few minutes. One more, a couple other questions, Doc. They've projected that 37% of all the species on the planet, not all of them, but most of the species, could go extinct if you could show that graph up there by 2050.
Aaron, if you can bring up the extinction slide again, please.
And we ourselves could be in trouble between 2070 and 2100. What's your personal feeling? Are we on our way out as a species due to our own anthropogenic sixth extinction that we ourselves caused? Or do you think there's some real hope that they can marshal the forces? And why I say marshal, maybe a Marshall Plan type of implementation of a project that could maybe sidestep some of this. Australia lost, some billion animals during the fires last year, and maybe 1.5 billion, and they would probably get hit hardest on this extinction chart.
I think Australia is certainly one of the countries that needs to change radically, and I think the Australian government has had a terrible attitude towards this whole problem. And I'm in New Zealand. Actually, there's a reason I'm in New Zealand. I think New Zealand will be better off than many other places around the world.
Right.
Go on everywhere else. And so the New Zealand government has certainly tried to play their role, but we're one of the minor players, and we sort of get dragged along with the big guys, and especially China, Europe, and the U.S. And so those are the key three areas that can really play a leadership role and help to change things. And I think major change could occur on about a 10 to 20 year time. The average lifetime of a car is about 12 years. So the next generation of cars could be entirely different. And there are signs that these kind of things are happening. Certainly the politicians can put in place a lot of the things to make that happen. But industry is not adequately on board at this time in many cases.
Doctor, if you could address the UN Assembly yourself in Glasgow in November 1st, what would you say to them?
Well, I think overall we need to put a price on carbon. That means that what tends to happen at the moment is you have a town which says, we're going to be responsible, we're going to put a penalty on electricity or gas usage, and the next thing you know, the companies that are in there, they move out of town into the town next door. Or they do it from California and they go to Texas. And so unless everybody is doing this is where the national policy aspects become very important, then companies will just move, and they can move from one country to another country even. And so this is where things like tariffs and trade policies come into play. And this is one of the reasons why the whole problem becomes so complex, because there is, in the past at least, there has not been somebody in Washington who is in charge of the whole problem. Instead, it's one secretary versus another in different areas, and they're all arguing for their own cases, and the whole thing is not pulled together. But I think this administration has come as close as any to trying to put that framework in place, both internally and also internationally. John Kerry internationally, to try this, but it's a major challenge for these guys, and I just have my fingers crossed.
That's good.
Dr. Kevin, but I know you're kind of watching the time. We have a question that came in from a viewer in Canada. What do you think of the carbon tax in Canada, and do you think it is working, and or how does it even work in the first place?
Yes, so that was an example. That's very courageous of Canada to do that, and I really like to see it. And the thing is that it needs to be brought in, but then the carbon tax actually has to increase gradually over time. And at the same time, as you increase that carbon tax, you want to decrease the tax on food or something else, so that there's no net cost to the so-called man or woman in the street. The incentive then is to use more, and that's the challenge for politicians in order to, how do you do that?
Dr. Trenberth, I've been kind of following this for a long time, since 2004. I know that the ICPP realizes that some kind of carbon capture is going to be necessary to try to solve this problem within time. What would you think about the G20 coming together and building 20,000, 1,000 each of these 1 billion ton or 1 million ton, CO2 extraction plants that's up in Canada? I think Carbon Engineering is the one who invented it, and Bill Gates invested in it. And if we could do 20,000 of those, Dr. Trenberth, and we could maybe follow Princeton's 15 wedge plan for reducing carbon, and everybody kind of individually got on board by eating less beef and planting a few trees and buying an electric car, and we had a carbon tax. Don't you think that there would be some way that we could collectively solve this problem before we lose, 37% of the animals on the planet and put ourselves behind the 8 ball?
I certainly think we can make progress in that area. I'm not sure I would devote a lot to the carbon capture aspects of things. It's much better to leave the coal in the ground in the first place rather than put it in the atmosphere and then try and catch it where it's very diffuse. And the problem is that it takes quite a bit of effort and energy to do that, and so the returns are not that great. It's much better not to burn it in the first place. And so that means transitioning to renewable energies as fast as we can, and providing the incentives and the new technologies to do that. And I think we can certainly make progress. And I do want to put the message across that there is some reason for optimism that we can make progress on this. But as you have emphasized all the way along, the timeline is getting tighter and tighter, and we really do need to make substantial advances fairly quickly.
We have a very, very slight, tiny window, if we have any at all. And I think I'd like to, kind of end it there with our discussion. You've been wonderful. Your answers are dead spot on. If I got the gist of it, let me see if I can kind of summarize. We are running out of time, if we have any left at all. We are going to have to adapt. The countries are going to have to come together a lot more cohesively with a plan, and it's still going to take this big boat 10 to 20 years to try to make the turn. Do I have that correct?
Yes, basically.
Okay, that's all I want to know.
There you go.
You don't know how pleased I am to have you on the show and to spend your time with us all the way from New Zealand. So when you come to Vegas, Aaron and I are going to take you out and show you the best spot in Vegas and buy you and your wife dinner.
There you go.
And when the climate change gets really bad, Aaron and I are coming to New Zealand to live with you. Anyway,
thank you, Dr. Kevin.
Thank you so much, Dr. Trentberth. I appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day, and Aaron and I will take it from here.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Right on.
So, Aaron, what do you think?
What do I think is my head is spinning when you think about extinction. And, growing up, you only know of the word extinction when it comes to dinosaurs and pterodactyls and all that stuff. But now, when you're looking at what's out there, we're in trouble. We've been climate change has been in our vernacular easily for over 20 years, with Al Gore talking about it years ago and all that. And yet here we are, we really haven't done anything to really solve it. On a globally level, but again, even just at home, there are things we could be doing. I mean, I drive a semi, hybrid. Purposely, he mentioned, adding gas price, gas taxes and price. So, listen, I don't want to pay $3.70 per gallon now. That's why I got a partial hybrid, because of all the driving I do. My wife, she's on a plug-in. She's got a Ford C-Max. It's not 100% perfect, but it is still reducing our gas usage by that little bit. So there is a lot of things that we can do locally under our own roof, and collectively, I think that'll make more of an immediate impact on what we need to do before we wait for the government.
It all comes back to us to do it anyway.
Always starts at home.
Why not do it in advance? Because, it's only our lives at the end of the day that this affects.
Exactly.
So, and the governments, they're getting a few donations from the energy companies.
Right.
And, I drink a lot of the plastic bottled water,
sure.
Right? And I'm told Rita, I said, can we do it about plastic? She said, I don't know what to do.
Right.
And I talked to them, I said, well, we recycle. And they said, well, you know what they do with that, Scotty? They take our plastic bottles, they crush them down,
right.
They send them over to countries that have lax environmental problems, and it ends up in our oceans anyway.
Well, here's what I've done. I got me a steel container. I use the filtered water that comes out of my refrigerator purposely to reduce our plastic. So okay. I know we're watching the time, but October 2nd is pretty important.
I really want to cover that if we can. The important takeaway from this show has got to be the Billion Man March. If we can get everybody that's in earshot distance around the world to tell a friend and have them tell a friend and have them go out on October 2nd at 7 p.m. at night, take their phone, shine it into the sky, take their flashlight, shine it into the sky, take their candle, whatever they got, and we can make an impression on the leaders around the world that we're out of time. From what I heard the doctor say, we're out of time and we don't have a great plan.
No, we don't.
So, it's up to us, individuals and society and grassroots, to come up with the plan. Let's make the governments accept the plan that we have, and let's get out there and send a message to the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, November 1 through the 12th. Come up with an actionable plan that actually works, and let's preserve our way of life on this planet. It's a great planet. It's got some wonderful animals. I love nature. I don't want to see a third of it gone. I want my kids or grandkids or whoever, next generation, I want them to have just a good earth to enjoy as I had. And so at that, I'd like to close the show. Aaron and I will see you again down the road at a later date. We'll have another show and an update. In the meantime, Aaron, parting words?
Parting words, folks. We can all make a difference. Just one small minor change in your daily routine to affect climate change can make the difference for a long time. And October 2nd, no matter where you are, just turn those lights on, man.
And like Jim Jeffrey said at the end of his show, we can all do better. Hey, thank you so much. Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. See you soon. Okay, we're good? Oh, interesting. I don't think there's another show.